Guys, here about 11 and a half weeks out. Today is like leg day number 2, or I guess number 1, depending on where it is in the week. But it's going to be hams and glutes. Not that I really need another leg day. Quads have always been a strong point, and I have a gorilla ass. But Danny thought it would actually be a good idea if I spent a whole nother day on hams and glutes, because my upper body's probably going to be undersized by the time I get to nationals anyway. But I can make my lower body an even stronger point. For anyone watching, I think most people, especially guys, probably do need a ham and glute day. It's something that's underdeveloped in a lot of competitors, and it's something that will really make your rear shots look much better, and even your side shots, because your glute and ham will hang from the side. So let's get into it. I'm going to start with some seated or lying leg curls here. Do plenty of warm-ups, plenty of volume on this movement, and then everything else we move into, it'll probably be quick warm-up and a big top set, back up set kind of scheme. So they do have that prime lying leg curl over there, the plate loaded one. I really do like that one. I like the feel of it a little bit better than this one, but having to load plates and unload plates is a bit of a pain in the ass if you want to end with something like a drop set where you have to change the weights. So if I'm training by myself, which I usually am, I like this selectorized piece. You know, I can just be laying here, instantly take the pin out, put it back in if I want to do a drop set. So working up there, I think I did like 20 on the first set, real easy. So it's kind of a pyramid, 20, 15, just did 12. It was kind of hard. I'll do one more feeder set of like 8 to 10 that'll be fairly close to failure, and then I'll gauge from there what I want to do for the last set. So I think lying leg curls have kind of fallen out of favor lately. It seems like everyone's saying seated leg curl is the best thing to use for growing your hamstrings, and I think technically that's true, but I still love the feel of a lying leg curl. But it is inherently more difficult in that shortened to contracted range, you know, right as you finish the hamstring contraction, compared to a seated leg curl. And so that part of the range of motion will fatigue fastest. So if I'm going to do 2 leg curl variations in the same day, which I will today, I always like to start with the lying, go into the seated. I'll get more output out of both of them. The lying leg curls are done. Worked up to, I think it was a top set of 8, and then I did 2 drops and then finished some partials. I think it was like 30 some reps total. That went pretty well. Now, like I said before, we're on to the seated leg curl, which is going to be a little bit more emphasis on the length and range. And that's true just based on the inherent positions of a seated leg curl at your hips and knees. And then the nice thing about these prime machines is that they also have this variable resistance profile. So if I was doing this movement first in the session, I'd probably just put it on the mid setting on 1. That's what we usually do on the quad day as our first movement. Today, again, since I'm already exhausted the shortened range a little bit, I'm going to shift it to the lengthened or mid-lengthened position, which is setting number 5 on any prime piece. Already super warm, got a big pump going in the ham, so I don't need very much warm up on here. I'll do 1 or 2 feeder sets to see what weight I want to use for the big set, and then we'll go into it. So, one thing that's really important with any seated leg curl is that you adjust the machine to your body. I mean, that's true of any machine, but I think it's especially true with this movement and with this piece in particular, because there's so many different pieces, points of adjustment here. But you know, I have a pretty short torso and really long legs, so I have to be way back on the pad here, set the seat really far back, or the back pad really far back, so that my knees are roughly in line with the fulcrum here. Somebody who was the same height as I am, but who had a longer torso and shorter femurs, would probably need to move this back pad way further up to have their legs in a proper position. What we're going to do here is called a Chris pause set, another thing I picked up from Chris Edmonds. You start it the same way you would a normal rest pause set, where you're going to go to failure or near failure 3 times with the same weight with 20 to 30 seconds in between rounds. But instead of stopping there, I'm going to do a drop of about 40% after that 3rd round, rest another 20 seconds or so, go to failure 1 more time. And then since this machine lends itself to this really well, I'm just going to finish with some partials and probably an iso hold. So it's going to be a long set. This usually lasts 2.5, 3 minutes all told. So I think a few weeks ago I'd be more out of breath at this point, but as weight comes down in the prep, recovery between sets gets easier. But that went pretty well. Massive pump in the hams definitely after that. I maybe overshot the weight a little bit. I would have liked to get a few more reps on each round of the rest pause, but all in all, pretty good set. So that's it for the 2 leg curls. Going to move on to some back raises, which are really glute raises. First movement for glutes for the day. Everyone calls this a back raise just because your back or your torso is the thing that's moving up and down, but really you want all the motion to be in your hips, so it's really a glute movement, at least the way I'm doing it with the intent that I'm doing it. One thing you'll probably see at a lot of gyms, this one included, is that the foot pad on this thing is way too narrow. You know, you see how narrow these are. That's only going to work for you if you're about 5 feet tall and have super narrow hips. Neither of which describes me. I'm average height, I'm about 5'9", and I have super wide hips and a pretty severe hip angle and long legs. So, you know, my feet really need to be about this far apart to feel right. So, you know, just if you can find a platform or even some bumper plates right there will work, but you don't want to go with a tiny foot pad if you can help it. If you are using this movement for glutes, one of the things you can do to make sure you keep the motion in your hips and that you're not just extending your spine is to actually kind of try to round your upper back. You know, your thoracic spine can round quite a bit, so almost kind of try to turtle shell your back, and so you'll see it from the side. So you don't want your back to be here, you want to be over here, because the only motion that matters is what's in your hips. So another point of setup here for this is that you want the hip pad to be low enough that you can get a full range of motion at your hips. I think the reason a lot of people only feel this movement in their back is that they set the hip pad too high to where you can't really get much hip range of motion, so all you can really do is flex and extend your spine. So you'll notice for me, it's actually pretty low. I mean, to be honest, you kind of want it to be almost up in your crotch or even lower. You know, so here's my hip bone, and here's where I have the pads, like right, you know, maybe a couple inches down my thigh from my hip bone. There's that much distance in between. And that means that I can go all the way to the bottom here and get full hip flexion, like there, hip extension at the top. Whereas if I were to raise this really high, you know, I might think, well, I'm not that short, I need it to be pretty high. If I have it all the way up here, you know, if I only go down this far, I can't really get any more hip range of motion. And so to get any further, I'm basically just letting my spine flex. So set it probably lower than you think you need to. So like I said before, we got super warm at the first couple movements, so we don't need a ton of warm up on everything else. So here I really just played with the setup, made sure that everything feels okay, and I'm gonna go into a big, probably double drop set. I've got a 105 and a 50, so I'll drop from the 105 to the 50 and then finally to body weight. Maybe give myself 5-10 seconds rest in between drops. Now I have an ass pump to match the hamstring pump. That one set definitely did the trick, so I'm gonna rest a couple minutes, put those dumbbells away, and we'll be on to the big deadlift for the day. I've been kind of alternating between RDLs out of a rack and stiff leg pulls from the floor, and I think I'll do the pulls from the floor today. More fun and actually less of a pain in the ass to set up because there's already a deadlift platform with weights over there. Deadlifts and whether or not to do them and when to do them is kind of a perennially debated topic in bodybuilding. You know, for me, it's definitely more of a hip exercise than a back exercise. Again, just due to my build, I've got long legs, wide hips. I'm a very efficient puller. So, you know, conventional deadlifting is a pet exercise of mine, or really any deadlift variation is. And as a powerlifter, it's what I was by far the best at. Now for bodybuilding, it's not really that great of a muscle building movement if all I do is just start the session off with a conventional deadlift and try to deadlift as much as I can. Even for reps, it just doesn't really put tension on any one muscle enough to cause that much growth. But if I do them like on today, where my hams and glutes are already exhausted coming into the movement, and then I do more of a stiff leg pull with a controlled eccentric, then it becomes a really good glute ham exercise. And of course, any deadlift variation is going to build your erectors. So that's how I'm doing it now. Sometimes if I have a different split and I don't have a second leg day, I'll do it kind of on a pull day where I have a bunch of back work, but then also some hamstring work. So I always kind of think of it as a general posterior chain exercise. It's really not, for me, it's not really a great upper back or lat movement. But if you have a different build, especially people with short arms, I've noticed the people who really struggle the most to deadlift a lot of weight tend to actually get a lot out of it in terms of back growth. One of the things that Danny and I were talking about yesterday is how most people really shouldn't lose that much strength during prep, at least not if it's a normal length prep, 16 to 20 weeks. And I think the deadlift is probably the perfect example of that. It's understandable if you lose a little bit of pressing strength as you lose weight just because you're losing stability. But with pulling, as your midsection gets smaller, if anything, your leverages for pulling should get better. And I usually notice that during prep. Deadlifting just feels better because you're able to get into a better start position when you've got less fat on your stomach and your stomach just isn't as full from food volume. When you're deadlifting for bodybuilding specifically and not for powerlifting or just to move weight, one thing you probably want to do is control the eccentric. And what Danny and I have taken to doing is we call these quiet deadlifts or library deadlifts, because we try to control the eccentric to the point where the weight barely makes a sound when it touches the floor between reps. And we prescribe that to a lot of clients who are either having trouble with their deadlift technique or just want to get more growth out of their deadlift without just moving weight from A to B. Really good way to do it. And I think you'll notice if you're not used to it, those last few inches as you approach the floor, you'll notice how tight you have to stay through your whole body, all the way from your hams, glutes, all the way up to your traps. So if you are someone who gets a lot of back growth out of deadlifting, that's a way to get even more back growth out of deadlifting, I would say, because everything back there has to isometrically contract so hard to maintain that kind of control all the way to the floor. Move. Pretty happy with that set. 8 reps is what I wanted. It's not an all-time PR compared to all my PRs on this movement, but I think under a state of fatigue, that's about matched. 6 plates for 8. My lower back was a little bit iffy warming up, but I didn't really want to talk about it before the top set. It's a good way to just psych yourself out. So if I needed to stop it early, I would have, but things felt really solid, kept good tension, and felt really everything in the glutes and hams, not too much in the lower back. And then just from contracting isometrically my mid-back, my traps are actually pretty blown up after that. I don't think they're going to grow from it necessarily, but it's a good sign that everything was tight and braced the way it needs to be. So I'll rest another 3-4 minutes, probably peel a plate off, see what I can get with 5 plates. Sets of 10 on deadlift always make me feel out of shape. No matter how heavy I am, it just never gets easy. I said I wanted to keep these quiet, so on that last set I thought about that episode of The Last of Us, where Joel is saying, you can't be quiet, you have to be silent. The reps weren't exactly silent, but close enough. Last movement of the day, we've done 2 leg curls, glute raise, and an RDL. So a lot of hinging movements and leg curl movements. Now we're gonna finish with kind of a more glute or hip dominant leg press. We really like this thing for training quads on Saturday as well, but when we do it that way, we usually put bands around it and put our feet real low on the platform. So now I'll have a real high foot position where I'm pushing through my heel. I'll probably do a little bit of a pyramid and work up to 1 top set bilaterally, and then I'll switch to a unilateral, a B stance, and probably do something like a cluster set where you alternate legs. And that's horrible and not fun, so I'm just trying not to think about it until I do it. Doing just kind of a basic pyramid here, same way we would do for quads, just 3 by 15. Did 15 at 3 plates, 15 at 4 plates, see if I can get all 15 at 5 plates here, bilaterally, and then we'll go into a real nasty single leg set, which I'll explain in a minute, and that'll be it. So note on footwear, I don't like to see people obsess too much over what they're wearing, but the right pair of shoes on leg day can make a big difference. So when I train quads, I always wear a heeled shoe. I really like squat shoes like that most powerlifters wear. Kind of annoyingly expensive, and it's another thing to buy, but I really find that it's worth it. If you don't have a pair of squat shoes for training quads, then even using something like a heel wedge or just a plate under your heel if you're squatting can do basically the same thing. But for training glutes, I definitely prefer a flat shoe. And usually mobility, flexibility doesn't become an issue there because you use a higher foot position, you're not so reliant on ankle flexibility. And these are actually some kind of fancy deadlift shoes that a friend gave me, but if you don't have these, which most bodybuilders won't, really any flat-soled shoe that's nice and sturdy will work. I don't prefer going in just socks on a leg press because usually there's not enough traction. You want something that your foot can push out against a little bit. So just a basic pair of like wrestling shoes, like Asics, will work, and those can usually be found for like 40, 50 bucks at any shoe store. Good for deadlifting too. Another benefit of having a day where you really focus on hams and glutes is that it actually tends to make your quad day feel better, assuming you're using good technique on the movements that are supposed to work your glutes. A lot of times people will have hip pain and especially knee pain because they're not really engaging their glutes. They're not very stable. And so rather than loading into both the hips and the knees on a quad movement, it goes all on the knees, just to put it simply. So this was another idea that Danny had and another reason why I decided to have this second leg day. So it's a little bit counterintuitive, but my knees have actually been feeling a lot better the past couple months having this extra leg day for glutes and hams than they did when I was only training legs once per week. And some of that's due to losing weight just because in prep, but yeah, good quality movement will tend to make a joint feel better if it's having pain. The bilateral work went really well. I ended up getting 15 reps each at 3, 4, and 5 plates. It's a little progression from last week. I think I was shy like a rep or 2 of that 15 last week on the final set. So now we're gonna go into what I mentioned earlier. It's a cluster set using a B stance. So if you've never heard of a B stance, it's basically an alternative to just going single leg. So if I was just single leg on this leg press, I'd have 1 foot on the pad, obviously, and the other foot just kind of dangling out in space. And that doesn't tend to provide a lot of stability. So what you can do instead is what is usually called a B stance, where let's say my working leg is my right leg. I'm gonna put my right foot up where I've had it so far, kind of high on the platform to get my glute working. The off leg, my left leg, I'm gonna have my toes just on the bottom of the platform. And the idea isn't to really give myself any help. I'll give myself a tiny bit of help just on accident, but really that foot is there to hold a most stable position. So my hips stay square on both sides rather than letting them rotate too far to one side or the other, which is what tends to happen if you have that other foot just dangling out in space. And then what I meant by a cluster set is I'm gonna alternate leg to leg. Basically, I'll do some reps with one leg, then let it rest while I do some reps with the other leg. A typical way you might do a cluster set if you were doing any bilateral movement would be to just do some reps, rest, repeat. But when you're doing a unilateral movement, you can kind of get it all done in one go by just alternating side to side. And that gives you roughly a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio, which is basically what you're going for with a cluster. unlike a rest pause set where you go to failure or near failure on every round, we're gonna stay pretty far away from failure until the end. So I stripped the weight down by quite a bit here. My goal here is to get 5 sets of 5 on each leg. So I guess it's actually gonna be about 50 reps total. It's gonna be pretty nasty. It's always pretty nauseating, but super effective, gives you a huge pump, and it ends up being a really effective set that actually isn't quite as taxing on the nervous system as if you just went all the way to failure several times the way you do with a rest pause. Our coach, Justin, always says you don't train your way into shape for a show, you diet and cardio where your way into shape. And for the most part, I agree, but throwing a few sets like that per week, you might find you don't need quite as much cardio, which is always a plus. If I'm gonna suffer, I'd rather suffer in the weight room than on the Stairmaster. So legs are pumped, glutes are pumped, and knees feel excellent. So it's a good day overall. So that's it for today's ham glute workout, leg workout number 1 of the week. So quick recap, we did lying leg curl, seated leg curl, 45-degree back raise or glute raise, stiff legs from the floor, and then finally this hammer hip press. On everything, we pretty much worked up to 1 or 2 really hard sets, along with a little bit of extra volume for the feeder sets. So really not a ton of volume on paper, but every one of those sets we made count. So if you've got any questions, comments, please like, share, comment, subscribe, or hit us up over DM. It's at David LaMartina, at Danny LaMartina DPT, and at team_Troponin. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you guys soon.